And the next presentation is going to be Dr. Carter, Dr. Novia Carter. Dr. Carter is the director of the National Drug Council. She is the chair of the National Child Protection Council and conducts seminars throughout the country on children and women's rights. Dr. Carter-Lookie serves as the clinic director of the Child Advocacy Clinic at the Crisis Center. As an educator, psychologist, Dr. Carter serves as an agent of change in our community. So that's a brief overview of Dr. Carter's background. Please let's hear from Dr. Carter, the impact of domestic violence on children.
Pleasant good morning to you all. You are the bars from which your children as living arrows are set forth. When we think about children and domestic violence, one of the key components we must look at is what are the needs of children on the whole? The needs are children need to be in safe, secure environments, free from violence. Children need to have parents that love them and whose whole purpose is to protect them. But more so than anything else, children need a sense of routine and stability. Sadly, so when we look at a lot of children who are victims of domestic violence, a lot of these children are going through a whole lot more. For many children, home is a safe haven. But for many, many, many children throughout our country, this place is not a safe and secure environment. And so a lot of children go through incidents, assaults, hear things, see things that impact their overall development. Let me give you an example. A child shared this with us. Me and my sister are scared, says one young boy who lives in a violent home. Our parents fight a lot and we fear that our father is going to shoot our mother. It's scary every day because you never know what could pop off. I love my parents. I don't want them to split up. I am angry and afraid. How will we eat or where will we sleep if daddy leaves? The reality of this young boy is the reality for countless children throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And the question always is, what will his future look like? Who are meeting his needs? And so when we look at domestic violence, when we look at intimate partner violence, or whether you like the term, when we look at violence in the home, it's important for us to wonder or to hold on to one human truth. Violence in the home challenges human rights. It's a problem that exists not only in our country, but this is a worldwide phenomenon where countless children throughout the world are victims of domestic violence. Sadly so, a lot of these children go unnoticed. Sadly so, a lot of these children are not counted in the numbers. Let me give you an example. When we talk about domestic violence, a lot of persons simply look at what goes on in that home. But let's look at what it does for the community. The children who are watching in the neighbor's house are also victims of domestic violence. And so we have already talked about a definition for domestic violence, but I want you to look at it now from a child's perspective. What is domestic violence? It is hostile, it is abusive, and it is neglectful behavior targeted at the child. And that targeted could be whether by the parents or another adult in the home. We have two types of children, those who have direct exposure to the acts of violence. Those are the kids who see it, hear it, even smell abusive behavior. Now, those kids who are direct exposure, be mindful of one key thing. It also involves the kids that live in that neighborhood who are also learning the effects of domestic violence. We also have those children who are exposed indirectly to acts of violence. And those are the kids who may not have seen the actual blows, but you know what they have seen? They've seen the bruises. They've seen the broken objects around the home. They've seen the stressed out parents. And sadly so, they may even go to the full extreme where they've seen the death as a result of a person being involved in domestic violence. And so let's try, before we even tackle it directly, let's have a look at the extent of the program. No, I do not have local statistics, but what we can do is extrapolate from what the worldwide statistics say and try and get an idea of what is our current situation here in the Bahamas. The Center for Disease Control indicated that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men experience physical domestic violence in their lifetime. A lot of persons have a tendency to raise their eyebrows when they hear that 1 in 7 men are also victims of domestic violence. So let me say this very clearly. Domestic violence is transgenerational, meaning that it can be passed down from generation to generation, but not only that, it doesn't depend on gender. Men can be victims of domestic violence. Maybe not in the numbers that women are, and maybe simply because the male species does not even report it. But I want you to be mindful of the statistics. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men throughout their lifetime has been a victim or has been directly involved in domestic violence. And so what does the statistics look like for us in terms of our children? 1 in 5. Imagine that if we have 60,000 children enrolled in educational institution, and that's between the age of 5 and 18, 60,000 children. 1 in 5 of those children have been exposed to domestic violence. 1 in 5 of those children are gonna need some help. So let's think about it. We like to say children should be counting their blessings, but the reality is some children are counting their bruises. And a lot of times people are looking for those bruises to be physical bruises, but the bruises are on the inside. And that makes it even worse. Many cases, a child's developing brain can be rewired as a result of violence. Kids can grow up believing that violence is normal and that they are to blame for it. And as a result of this, I want you to look at this number. 30% to 60% of perpetrators of intimate part of violence also abuse children. And so when we talked, I heard in the last presentation when the Commissioner of Police was speaking, someone made a suggestion that maybe we need to look at a domestic violence unit within the police force. Let's be mindful, domestic violence and child abuse go hand in hand. And that's a worldwide statistic. So when we're looking at domestic violence, we are also looking at the amount of children that are also being abused, because there is a direct correlation. Those two crimes are directly related. So let's have a look at it. When we talk about brain development, I want you to notice one key aspect. Brain development, the structure of the brain is changed as a result of domestic violence, as a result of trauma, as a result of abuse. And so let's look at it. The picture on your left shows a regular brain. It shows a healthy, happy brain. Notice now the front part of the brain is what we call the thinking part of the brain. In the healthy brain, that part is nicely red and lit up. Red indicating good activity. The brain is working well, the brain is able to think properly, the child is doing pretty well. Now when we come to the brain of the abused child, notice that there are more black areas, meaning no activity is going on. Notice that you will see an increase even in the purple areas, but more pronounced than anything else, you'll notice that the red area, which is showing brain activity, has decreased. Why? This child isn't in cognitive thinking mode. This child is not using their brain for thinking, not using their brain for educational pursuits. This brain is in flight and fight mode. This child is on constant alert. This child is wondering, should I run? Should I stay? This child is wondering, am I gonna be okay tomorrow? Am I gonna have a gun in my face? Am I gonna see my mommy? This child is stressed out. This child is experiencing trauma. So what does it look like? How does domestic violence affect children? It's crazy how it affects children, because not only are we looking on it in terms of brain development, not only are we looking at it physically, we're gonna see the behavioral changes in the child. We're gonna see emotional changes. We're gonna see social changes. And if you put all of these elements together, you are gonna see a child that's ripe to become involved in gang activity. You're gonna find a child that's ripe for teenage pregnancy. You're gonna find a child definitely, and not in all cases, who is not interested in education, but now you see how violence is transgenerational, because now you have an angry child who is acting out against the system, an angry child acting out against their parents. In all actuality, domestic violence is a breeding ground for additional criminal activity. Domestic violence is a breeding ground for a child who will not perform well academically in school. But sadly so, domestic violence also opens the door for a child who will now have physical symptoms, stomach pains, poor hygiene, nervousness, short attention span. Domestic violence opens up and changes the life of this child. And so a lot of people talk about, when they talk about domestic violence, they simply look at it as the man and the woman who is involved in this dispute. However, let's be mindful of one thing. The person who may be affected the most is the quiet victim, the victim who simply watches and observes, the victim who learns behavior from the way the adults behave. Let's look at it, because I really want you to understand the scope of this problem. Boys who witness domestic violence are twice as likely to abuse their own partners and children. This is the transgenerational. Domestic violence, it is almost as if domestic violence can be passed down from one generation to the other through the gene pool. But look at it again. Males exposed to domestic violence as children are more likely to engage in domestic violence as adults. They are 15 times more likely to be physically or sexually abused. And so when we look at how domestic violence impacts the children, I hope I made the case for you to see that it's traumatic for a child. So let's look at it a little deeper. I want to look at it from a psychosocial development point. Erik Erikson laid out 8 different developmental stages that all of us must go through in order to be what the world perceives as successful adults. But one of the things that happens is when an incident of domestic violence happens, it almost as if it short circuits what we should have gone through in a step-by-step process. Imagine this for a minute. And even a baby in the womb realizes that something isn't right. And so babies, of course, have certain developmental milestones that they should achieve. But when a child is being neglected, even as young as 1, 2 years old, when that child is being neglected, that child realizes it. And the child displays it by either not being potty trained on time. The child displays it by not having a happy disposition. The child displays it by being colicky. And so when we look at domestic violence, I want you to realize one key thing. It impacts the psychosocial development of a child. And as a result of that, the child now socializes differently. A lot of things weren't explained to us in terms of growing up. I think even coming into the Christmas season, a lot of people may not even understand why we buy our children toys. One of the key things, and I guess for me as a psychologist, I watch everything. But for me as a psychologist, I like to watch little people play, 2 and 3 years old. When you see a child playing with a toy, you could get so much from this child in terms of what their home life is like. For us at the Crisis Center, we have a playroom, and there have been many incidents where we put a child in the playroom and we sit down on the ground with the child just to watch how the child plays. Sometimes you could see the violence in the children. Sometimes you watch them with the dolls and they act out sexual behavior. But the real red flag for us comes when a child plays with a toy and they do not talk. When they're not having play talk, when the child is not engaging in a little fight with the 2 little stick men, when the child is not enjoying a tea party and talking to themselves about the tea party, that's an indication that something is not progressing right with the child. Think about your own children's development and think about when you watch them play with their toys, what you saw. Kids who the teachers beat them at school a lot, man, they be killing them little doll when they reach home. Boys with their toys and their trucks, when they're playing at home with their toys and their trucks, they talking about either something they saw on TV. And so when you see a child who now has a doll and slapping and punching and angry in their play, it's a red flag for us. And so a lot of people do not take into account the children, their victims. The bruises that are not physical bruises, but the bruises that are internal bruises are even more dangerous. Let's have a look at this. The bruises that don't always show are in the little boys and the little girls. So what are the boys at risk of that? Learning that males are violent. These young men learn that this is acceptable behavior. From the police force point of view, and even for us in social services, even for us in education, even for us at the Bahamas Crisis Center, it is so sad when we meet a child and you're able to say, I know this family. It's sad when we're able to say the brother was already in our system. It's sad when we're able to say, I'm the daddy, they're going to jail. And I just need you, all of you, to understand that violence is transgenerational. And so a young boy learns how to treat his mother, how to treat his wife, how to treat his girlfriend by what he saw his father do to females. And so what do these boys learn who are victims of domestic violence? They learn that males are violent. They learn to disrespect women. They use violence as a way to control relationships. And they even develop some confusion and insecurity about being a man because they feel as if might makes right. And so in some cases, and we've seen an increase in it, you see a lot of sibling abuse as well. You see sibling sexual behavior. You see these boys who grow up and eventually they become disrespectful and then sometimes even physically attacking their own mothers. And so what's a good word? The magnitude or how long the arm of domestic violence is, it reaches into our next generation. Let's look at our females, for example. A female who has grown up in a domestic violent home learns that it is okay for a man to hit. If he hit me, he ain't loving me. But this nigga love me strong because he stop me up when I wear this or when I go out. If your man don't do that, he ain't. And that's the behavior that these young girls learn. They learn that love is shown by a fella not being able to control his temper. And she learned that on the lap of her mommy. Girls involved in domestic violence also learn to accept violence as a part of the relationship. And sometimes even because of their relationship, they are afraid even to ask the man to wear a condom. Because in some of these men's mind, the idea is, if I have to wear a condom with my girl, she out there doing foolishness. And so even though the female wants to ask him to wear a condom, the fear of physical abuse prevents her from doing so. But she also learned on the lap of her mommy that I have to take whatever he gives me. And so if he won't give me a baby after a baby after a baby, this is acceptable. Once again, people, I am hoping that I am demonstrating to you the long arm of domestic violence in terms of its impact on the next generation of children. And so when we look at the impact of domestic violence, a lot of these children have nightmares. A lot of these children is almost in their brains as if the movie keeps playing over and over and over again in their head. And so you'll see children in the classroom environment who are quiet, just simply staring at the board. A teacher who's not aware of it may think he's a quiet boy. She's a good student. They're just sitting there. But in all actuality, the children are living in utter hell because over and over in their mind, the movie that they saw last night just keeps running over and over again. And so what do these children do? They don't want to go home. A lot of these children don't want to see the dad or the mom, whoever's the abusive one. And so they lose interest in doing things that they like to do before, things that they previously enjoyed. They would sit in a corner, they would stare, they would be sad, but more so than anything else, one of the sure telltale signs is this child is anxious. The child is jumpy. The child is, like I said, in constant flight or fight. I either have to fight my way through this or I got to run. Imagine what space in the brain is available for academic learning. Now, let me be clear on it. There are some children who throw themselves in academia simply for one reason. I got to get out of this house. They throw themselves behind doing well in school because they look at education as the way out. Let me go off to school and leave these crazy people behind. And so domestic violence doesn't always mean that the child is not going to do well in school. Domestic violence means also for that other child, I have to get out of here. I have to get a scholarship. This is my only way out. So I think I covered this really quickly already, but I'll just go through it again for you really quickly. So children who are exposed to domestic violence show behavioral, social, and emotional problems. the disobedience, the disrespect, the low self-esteem, problems with social relationships at school. The biggest one that the police will also notice, oppositional behavior, hate authority, hate being told what to do, hostility, anger, and of course, aggression. Also, we're gonna see cognitive and attitudinal problems, low performance in school, conflict resolution skills seem almost to be non-existent, all right? Violence is the way out. Stereotype behavior in terms of, I as a man, you as a woman, and you need to rule and this, all of that. Sadly so, another social ill that we see coming directly from this is we have a lot of high school males and females who are also involved in intimate partner violence, even in the high school. So you have boys who are in grade 12 who pushing around their girlfriends in grade 9, who beating some of their little girlfriends. But let me not be gender biased, because the same thing happens too. You may have a nice boy who is older, his girlfriend beating him up as well. And so all of this stems from the family. What's the long-term effect? I think the picture shows the long-term effect. Depression, trauma, pain. And that lasts for a lifetime unless help and hope is obtained. So let's look at it. What does it look like in children? Headaches, stomach problems, allergies, speech disorder, vomiting, bedwetting, overall failure to thrive. But they're also at high risk for developmental delays. You may see a child who's 5 years old who's still bedwetting. You may see a 5-year-old who isn't speaking. I think for me, it's almost stagnating when you look and see how domestic violence has the potential to change generations of children. It's staggering to see how we've not we, but society as a whole has never really looked and see how serious domestic violence is on the life of a child. And so for school health and performance, lower grades, school absentee, school suspension. When you look at it, even when we look at domestic violence has the potential to impact national development. Because imagine this, someone who may have been a good student, his life has changed as a result of watching his mommy and daddy. He's changed. And so he's not walking into his potential because he's an angry young man. He's one other Black man that will join the prison workforce. Some of the biggest victims of domestic violence are the smallest people. At the Crisis Center, we like to say, make every child count. Every child we need to look at. So in conclusion, I want to leave these points for you just as a summary. Many children are suffering in silence with little to no support. Children who are victims of domestic violence are denied their right, their God-given right. In fact, the Bahamas government in 1991 signed on to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that guaranteed children the right to live. It almost as if the government promised children to live in a violence-free Bahamas. We promised that they would grow up in safe and healthy home environments, free of domestic violence. Children who are exposed to domestic violence in the home have academic problems, limited social skills, exhibit violent behavior, delinquent, but more so than anything, they suffer from depression and anxiety. In my opinion, more needs to be done to protect our children and to prevent domestic violence from happening in the first place. Children can be better protected from the effects of domestic violence and better supported in healing following exposure to domestic violence. One of the things though that I want to leave with you, and I just want you to consider it for a minute. Your neighbor who may be involved in domestic violence, that impacts your child because your child is peeking out through the window and watching. Your child sees their friend next door crying and they may go and even listen to the stories. So don't feel that because that doesn't happen in my house, that cannot impact my house. Another fallacy that people hold on to is, not really my business what they're doing over there, but it is your business. I have to fight against domestic violence and child abuse for one thing. I have 3 sons. I cannot guarantee who my sons fall in love with. And so I have to make sure that I am helping as many children as I can because I just don't know who my boys can fall in love with. And so we know what children need. They need adults who can speak out and break the silence. Children need to learn that domestic violence is wrong and there are non-violent ways to resolve conflicts. Children need to know that there are support services in our country that are promised by the Bahamas government. But more so than anything, children need to know that they are in safe and secure home environments. And if we cannot ensure that their home environments are safe and secure, the government have facilities that these children can grow and thrive in. Our thing at the Bahamas Crisis Center is helping people to realize help and healing is available. And our number is 328-0922. If you know a child who is a victim of domestic violence, if you know a family that needs help, and that help is beyond your scope, the biggest thing you could do is call us. Call us, call the police, so that that family can receive assistance. In closing, for a child, domestic violence lasts a lifetime. Violence, depression, imprisonment, alcoholism, low self, you all know this, everything that attacks the fiber of our Bahamian society, the fiber of who we are as a people. But let me leave you with this again. Before you judge someone's life, their past, or who they are as a person, you need to walk in their shoes. Walk the path they may have traveled. A lot of people who we look at and feel that they're okay, they're not okay because they've been victims of domestic violence. So before you could pass judgment, walk in their shoe. Take a walk in the shoe. Here's a few of the people that we've seen. I felt angry and frustrated, upset, annoyed, and every time I used to come home, I used to just stay in my room. And whenever mom shouted at me, I used to hurt her a lot. In my mind, of course. Before attending group at the Bahamas Crisis Center, I was a lot more upset and worried about my mental health and my well-being. Now I'm not as worried how bad my problems are. Relationships have gotten better. Everything because now I feel that people listen about what happened with daddy. When he had a tantrum and went off to the bar, and I just comforted mom and hug her, and she hugged me as well. Some days he would be out and me and mom would watch a movie and have some time together, which he wouldn't even let us do if he was home. I used to help cook with my mom because I enjoy cooking. So we'd like help each other get through this. Take a walk in someone's shoe rather than being judgmental. It's easy to look at the neighbor across the street who's a victim of domestic violence and say it's not your business. It is your business because your child is now also a victim of domestic violence. Your child is watching it. Your child is learning about it. And so take a walk in someone else's shoe in order to understand who these children are. One of my biggest complaints, I guess, is when children run away from home. And everybody passed judgment and who she read and she buy a man house and all that, a bunch of foolishness. So we don't know what those children home environments are like. And so a child who is running away, that's a call for help. Let's break the cycle in this country that encourages domestic violence by simply doing this, passing judgment against a child for her runaway behavior. Because we don't know what the home environment is like. We don't know. I leave you with this. The Bahamas Crisis Center is here for help and healing. We are in the restoration business. My thing for all of you is to simply take a stand. Take a stand to speak out against domestic violence. Take a stand that if you see a child being hurt, call us. If you see a child being hurt, report it. But more so than that, watch your own child. Because the violence that your child sees from somebody else's house is impacting even your baby. And so it's important to have conversations. On behalf of the Bahamas Crisis Center, I thank you for your attention. And I now open up the floor for any questions.